Pending Philippine claim to Sabah against Malaysia over possible claim to Spratly Island. Just recently, the Philippines Foreign Secretary Teodoro Locsin joined us as a reaction to the United States Embassy item describing Sabah as a part of Malaysia rendered a rectification to the said depiction via a Twitter post by saying that Sabah is not in Malaysia if you want to have anything to do with Philippines. The claim by the Philippines Foreign Secretary received an equally fierce reaction from the Malaysian Foreign Minister, Hishamuddin Hussein, who responded through his official Twitter account by saying that he would summon the Philippine ambassador in response to his Philippine counterpart's tweet on 27 July 2020. So this is an irresponsible statement that affects bilateral ties. Hishamuddin said, Sabah is and will always be part of Malaysia. Locsin rebutted his Malaysian counterpart via another Twitter post by saying that he would always summon the Malaysian ambassador in Manila. He said, no country can tell another what it can and cannot say about what the latter regards as rightfully its own. I am summoning the Malaysian ambassador. Likewise, Locsin was also quoted in some news report as saying that he would revive a departmental office dedicated to Philippines government effort on the Sabah issue. Also, a proposal by the Philippines Congressional Committee to include Sabah in the map of the Philippines to be painted in the Philippine passport grab headlines in Malaysia too. In 2019, Malaysia issued a strongly worded statement as a warning to the Philippines after Locsin abused the Philippines' claim to Sabah on various occasions, including his statement on Sabah in a congressional budget briefing. So the statement read, any remarks alluding to anachronistic claims will be rejected as unfriendly toward Malaysia. Malaysia does not recognize and will never entertain any claims by any party on Sabah. Thus, the recent outbreak between Locsin and Hishamuddin on Twitter to some extent resuscitated the dormant, long-standing but disquieting territorial dispute between the two Asian neighbors over the claim of Sabah. The Sabah dispute. The dispute is about the claim of both countries over much of the eastern part of Sabah, one of Malaysia's 13 states. Sabah was previously known as North Borneo before the formation of the Malaysian Federation in 1963. Peninsular Malaysia was restructured as a Federation of Malaya in 1948. A federation of what previously had been British Malaya, comprising of 11 states that existed from February 1, 1948 until September 16, 1963, and achieved independence on August 31, 1957. Then formally emerged as Malaysia with an inclusion of Singapore, North Brunei or Sabah, and Sarawak on September 16, 1963. When Malaysia inherited the British colonial enterprise in northern Borneo. So, the establishment of Federation of Malaysia resulted in the following dispute. First is conflict with Singapore. Second is the opposition and resistance of the Philippines and Indonesia to the inclusion of Sabah, along with Sarawak to the Federation of Malaysia that leads to the confrontation policy by Indonesia. Then third is the Philippines' claim of sovereignty over Sabah, which fostered a somewhat sour relationship between the Philippines and Malaysia. In the case of the Singapore Union with Malaysia, it was short-lived and lasted for less than 23 months. Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew signed the Malaysia Agreement in London on July 9, 1963. And eventually Singapore gained its independence from Malaysia on August 9, 1965. However, Sabah or North Borneo dispute, as it is often referred to, remains unresolved until today and continues to be speak on the eye, an unsettling tone in the bilateral relation between the Philippines and Malaysia, which has subsisted for over 3 decades. Philippines claim over Sabah. Sabah is located at the northeastern tip of Borneo and lies about 500 kilometers from the Philippines. Although Malaysia controls the territory, the Philippines has laid claim over Sabah since 1961. The first official attempt by the Philippines to claim Sabah was on June 22, 1962, when the Philippines filed a claim over Sabah against the United Kingdom, which has possession of territory at the time. The Philippines contended that the sovereignty over the territory has remained vested in the Sultanate of Solo. The occupation of territory, first by Overbeek and then and later by the British North Borneo Company, had been occupation by lessee or an administrator, not occupation by an owner or an sovereign. Claim over Sabah and the origins of the dispute to the United Kingdom government. The United Kingdom is a party to the dispute because it was responsible for handing Sabah North Borneo to Malaysia. Before the annexation of Sabah as a part of Malaysia, it was ruled by the Sultanate of Solo. Sabah was originally ruled by the Sultanate of Brunei in the early 1500s under the rule of Sultan Bolkiah in 1658. Sabah was ceded to the Sultanate of Solo for helping the Sultanate of Brunei settle and suppress a revolt. The northeast coast of Borneo, Sabah was awarded by Brunei Sultan Abdul Hakul moving to the Sulu Sultan Salahuddin Karamat Bachar from 1735 to 1742. Sabah was under the control of the Sultanate of Solo, especially by its coastal inhabitants. However, the control of the territory was relinquished to the British, especially the British North Borneo Company between 1878 and 1946, under the treaty signed on January 4, 1878, between the Sultan of the Solo, Mohammed Jamal al-Alam, and Baron de Overbeek and Alfred Den as a contact of the lease, grant and concession of the North Borneo territories for an annual payment of $5,000. Later on, the British North Borneo Chartered Company surrendered its duties and North Borneo became a British Crown colony on July 10, 1946. The Philippines maintained its territorial claim over Sabah based on the 1878 Peace Treaty and based on the historical account of Sabah is a gift from the Sultan of Brunei to the Sultan of Solo, which is now a region and a part of the sovereign territory of the Philippines. The Philippines stands firm that the 1878 treaty was the lease and not a deed of cession, as opposed to the claim and contention of Overbeek and died on January 22, 1878, where the British North Borneo Company presented that said treaty in London, saying that the Sultan of Solo ceded North Borneo to the under their translation and interpretation of the contents of the 1878 treaty. Overbeek and Den's version of the 1878 treaty stated that all the rights and power belonging to me over all the territories and the land being tributary to us on the mainland on the island of Borneo is consideration of the yearly compensation of $5,000, together with all the powers and the right usually exercised by the belonging the sovereign rulers and which we hereby delegate to him of our own free and sovereign will. Nevertheless, since the founding of the Federation of Malaysia in 1963 till this day, the Philippines has refused to recognize the position of Sabah by Malaysia. The Philippines has maintained its contention that Overbeek and then only transferred the right of the leasehold and not sovereignty over Sabah, since the transaction was 5-1.